Okay, so welcome to Retech, and today we're going to cover the Plus 4, the Commodore Plus 4. And I know you're going to say, well, you've done a few videos on the Plus 4, but this is kind of the culmination of all of the videos on the repair side of the Plus 4 and all of the repair systems that you can get for it, from processors to kernels to PLAs and so on, to make these machines function. And outside of Europe, I don't think there's many parts of the world that actually put as much effort into keeping the Plus 4 and the Commodore 16 going. And it seems that places such as Italy and so on are actually putting a lot of effort into these machines, and there's probably a good reason for it, because they sold quite well outside of the UK and the US. They sold reasonably okay in the UK, but not to the extent of the other micros, and that's why they're becoming very, very rare, and they're also getting very hard to get hold of in working condition. So most of the time you're going to find one of these or a Commodore 16 in very poor, non-working condition. So I bought this machine to do this video, really, to basically take a completely dead machine and replace all of the obvious components that usually go wrong. So I knew when I tested it that the motherboard was fine, and I knew that there was no capacitors blown on it and so on and so forth. So it's a good way, or a good starting point. I also knew that the PLA was not working on it, and the processor was also very dead, and a lot of that was down to the power supply, because the power supplies on these are the weakest link, and it's obviously surged with too much voltage and damaged everything on the board. But even so, the processors don't need that much voltage either to make them go bad, make them not work. So they can happen at any time, really. The processors going bad can happen almost from one day to the next on these machines. They do run hot. The PLA runs hot, the TED runs hot, the kernel runs hot, the Plus 4 ROMs run hot, and the basic ROMs run hot in these machines, and they're all prone to failure. So what I've done is I've taken all of those bits, bought as many replacement parts as possible, covering the bits of the machine that normally go dead or normally fail, and we're going to pop them into this machine and have a look and see how they fare and see what happens. So let's have a look at probably the last kind of hardware look at the Plus 4, and but it'll not be the last look at the Commodore Plus 4 as a whole, as a machine. But this is just covering the major components that go wrong with them and what you can do to replace or repair them. So let's have a look. Okay, so as you can see, we've got a very, very yellowed and very sorry looking Commodore Plus 4. And the reason you might be asking is, well, it's just another Plus 4, but parts are getting harder to come by for these machines, and also working processors and working PLAs are getting very, very difficult to come by as well, and they fail all of the time. So I'm going to use another Plus 4. I think this is the fourth one I've got, or the fourth one I own, but it doesn't work. And what I'm going to try and do is rebuild the machine out of new components, or as many new components as possible, so we can find out if we can really put together a machine that's working out of either recreated parts or any parts we can get hold of to make the machine work. So what we're going to do is going to take it apart, and we're going to look at what we've put in the machine up to this point. So the first thing we're going to do, your screwdriver, and we're going to take the machine apart. So we're just going to remove the normal screws and see what we're left with. Right, so we have a +4, or what really is left of a +4, because the first thing you'll notice is there are empty ROM sockets, and these are the original ROMs that were in the machine. Now the reason why I'm taking these out is because A, the +4 ROM doesn't actually do anything anymore, it's given up the ghost. So that leaves the kernel is the main other ROM, and just need to find a way of getting a +4 ROM to work. And one of the best ways of doing it is if you have one of these. And this one's a C16 +4 ROM set, and what it does, it actually replaces 3 of the ROMs. Well, it actually replaces 4 of the ROMs. And the only thing it doesn't have is the PLA, and you can see there's a blank socket here. Now, the PLA on this one is completely dead, it just shows a black screen. 2 of the original ROMs here work fine, it's just the +4 ROM set that doesn't work at all. But need to kind of modernize the machine just to see if modern components can make it work. And you can also see we have a Commodore 16/+4 CPU substitute, and it's the 85MC01, and as I said before, it's one of the nicer ones. There is an alternative, as we have spoke about, which is the 8501 to a 6510, and it comes with a modified kernel, and it's a very good ROM set, it works very well. But just for the sake of continuity, these 2 components are supplied and manufactured by the same small company in Italy, and the PLA itself is again supplied by the same company. And I found that the CPU is very good. It does have a few shortcomings, and the shortcoming being that it's got slight timing issues through the serial port with a disk drive, but you can get around it, and for most of the time it works fine, and it seems to work with nearly all of the cassette software I've tried, so it's quite a good alternative. And the +4 ROM set here, I've played around with it and I can't see any real difference between that and the original, and it works really well, including the +4 software that's on board. So the advantage of this is it actually gets rid of a lot of heat out of the machine, which is a good thing because they do run hot and they do cause problems. Now the PLA, which is this socket here, the original PLA I actually got was this one. And it is a PLA 251641-02, and it works really well, but unfortunately once it's in the socket here it stands way too proud, and you cannot get the case back down on the keyboard, so it's too high, it's too big. It works fine in the Commodore 16 but not in the +4. So I now have a different version and it's very much slimmer and smaller, and if we compare them you can see the difference in height, width, and it actually fits within this case, so you can shut the keyboard up. and you can then use it as a Commodore Plus 4, and it basically sits in this package just here. Okay, and you can see it sits fairly level. It's not a lot higher than the original chipsets or even the recreated Plus 4 chipset, so it clears the keyboard quite well, and you can actually shut the keyboard up, which you couldn't do before with the other version. So what else? Well, first of all, apart from the colour of the case, we need a heat sink for the TED chip. You can see there's a metal shield missing on the lid here, which I'm going to sort out in a little while. But what I'll do is I'll put a heat sink on here for now once I've tested it and make sure everything's fine. And really the innards of the machine is all fine. Everything else on this board tested out. There was no real massive problems with it. And it really just needs to be sorted out. Now the other major thing is this fuse here. It's been wire wrapped at some point, so that's going to come out before I even turn this board on. And also there's a converter cable at the back to run a standard Commodore 64 power supply, which actually saves me from changing this power port there for a standard Commodore one, because just like every other Plus 4 I've purchased, had a look at, repaired and so on, the power supplies are faulty, nearly every single one of them. And the other thing I did to this machine was sort the keyboard out. This was the original keyboard that came with the machine. Most of it didn't work and it wasn't making good contact with the bottom, even though most of the contacts in the keys seemed to be fine, and it needed the actual keyboard plate replacing and also quite a few of the keys. So after that was completed, we have a working keyboard which is in here. So basically the original back plate with a new keyboard, which was from another broken machine, and then basically put together in a kind of Heath Robinson kind of Frankenstein way, but it works, and it works fine. All it needs really is cleaning up and de-yellowing. So the first thing I'm going to do now is just replace the fuse and then power the machine on. Okay, so we're just going to we've popped the lid on, and obviously replace the fuse inside and put a little heatsink across the TED just to be on the safe side. And you know, you never know with these machines that you find on eBay or Gumtree or wherever you look for them, you know, what state they're going to be in, what somebody's done to them before, what kind of condition it's going to be in, what kind of iffy or slightly off-kilter repairs are going to have done to them in the past. And as I say, I think the person who had this before thought that it was a fuse, and for whatever reason wire wrapped the fuse, which is never a good thing. And obviously when they got the same results, such as a black screen, etc., that was it. They put it up for sale because obviously, you know, they had a few faults with the keyboard, etc., and it was probably a little bit too much for them to go into repairing it. But especially as probably at the time they sold this, the Plus 4 was kind of worthless, really. Now it's gaining in value and they are getting harder and harder to find. So the biggest reason for this is to find out whether or not you can repair it, and is it going to be reliable enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the machine on, and then you should see a familiar Commodore screen, and this one has 3+1 on key F1, which is brilliant because this machine never worked. It never had that option. Even when I swapped the chips out of this machine into a known working machine, we never had that option. So if I press F1, return, and we're into the familiar package to people who know these machines. And you know, so far everything that should work does work, and that's the same for everything else on this machine. Everything seems to work fine. I mean, all of the shortcut keys work, all the directory keys work, all of the function keys work, and it works the way an original +4 ROM set should work. You've got the obviously screen, so your PLA is working. You have a display and graphics on the screen, so your TED is working, and obviously the kernel is working because you're getting this, and you're also getting errors as well. So if I reset this, so obviously the TED's working as well as the basic interpreter. So all of the chips on board are actually working the way they should, and for all outward appearance this machine is functioning the way it should be functioning. So that's a good thing. And for the sake of about £40, £35 or thereabouts, you've got a brand new ROM set in here, which is almost compatible. The processor's the bit that is always going to be a stumbling block, but the machine functions, and it functions well. So yeah, the +4 has a few issues, not just cosmetically like this one with the keyboard and the case and so on, but generally they have issues with their components. And just by doing this, hopefully it gives you some kind of inspiration to get your Commodore Plus 4 out and try and have a go at repairing it, because you can get the major components for these machines. You can get all of the components that make these machines tick, from the CPU to the PLA, and they're all available. And once you get all of these components and you put them into a working motherboard, you've got a machine that's hopefully going to last a lot longer, because the components are new, based on a lot of the times newer technology, and that's always going to be a good thing. Now, the machines themselves, the keyboards can fail, they're getting fragile. The cases are actually quite sturdy, they stand up much better than most of the Commodore casings. And also, if you can keep the keyboard alive and all else fails, you can get an emulator for this machine, and you can use the case and keyboard to emulate the original machine, which will look identical once it's on the screen, but with the advantage of having built-in software on an SD card, which is going to be a lot quicker than cassette. But if you don't get to that point, hopefully you can get these machines repaired. There are a few downsides, which I think I covered in a video prior to this, about the serial ports. All of the fixes for the processor, unless you are replacing it with an original, have timing issues with the serial port. And it's not a massive problem. It's generally on startup, it's generally for the first seek on the drive, but after that, most of the time it's fine, and for most of the time you won't notice any difference whatsoever. There's also timing on the cassette drive, because you don't have the control line pauses that you do on the original kernel. So again, with this one here, which is the converter from the 8501, it comes with a kernel that actually puts the pauses in, and which is a good thing, because it helps you to use cassette drives where the pause wouldn't work unless it was a longer pause in the kernel. So that fixes that problem. For probably 80 to 90% of the software that's out there. But if you get disk-based software that is actually cheated a little bit on the pokes and the registers, and peeking at addresses that really it shouldn't be looking at, then that software is not going to run and it's going to fail. But it's not a massive chunk of software that fails. So for most of the time, for the most part, most of the software runs as it should, and you wouldn't know any difference. And to be honest, having brand new components, being able to have them reproduced and have them fitted, and to get a machine working using these components is a bonus, because not every machine is capable of having that done. Not every machine has had that done, and not every machine has quite a bigger following as the Commodore branded machines, which does help a lot. And that with the Sinclair Spectrum branded machines and the Commodore, they seem to be the two major players in remanufacturing everything from boards to CPUs to ROMs and so on to keep these machines running. So they're a good starting point. Okay. So thanks for looking at this last part of the hardware issue for the Commodore Plus 4. Well, up to now, unless I find out anything else that might be of interest. But I hope you found this interesting. I hope you go forward and you drag your old Plus 4 out of a cupboard that's been, where it's been sitting there for decades, and then see if we can get it to work. Okay, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you on this channel shortly. Thank you.